Okay, we're live.
It's your cue, right, Vivian?
Hello and welcome. And this is the office hour with
You are muted.
Vivian, our facilitator for today.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the conversation hour on community resilience and sustainability with Maggie. I'm Vivian from the Movement Strategy and Governance team, the facilitator for the meeting today. As most of you already know, Maggie Dennis is the vice president, and this hour is designated for having a conversation on areas that Maggie oversees. Before we start, a few quick things just to share with everyone. First, we will follow the friendly space policy today as usual, so that we can all have a great conversation with mutual respect. Secondly, thanks to those who have already pre-submitted their questions. We will treat these questions as priorities. We're still taking live questions during this hour, and we'd also like to encourage you to submit your questions by leaving them in the Zoom chat or the YouTube chat, and one of our team members will help collect them. This will also help us easily add them to the queue and to manage time. Third, if there's not enough time to get to your question today, they will still be answered in written form after the meeting. We have team member taking notes for this conversation hour, and the notes will be published as well, so we can also read them afterwards. So I'm now passing the mic to Maggie. How are you, Maggie? And also, I would like to first ask a question for all the people who are not that familiar with this conversation hour. Would you share with us again, which are the areas that fall under community resilience and sustainability?
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm glad you asked, Vivian, because even though my mother thinks I should stop doing this, the first thing I'm going to say is I am nervous. And the reason I say that is because as soon as I say it, I feel less nervous. So I'm less nervous than I was a minute ago. So yes, I'm Maggie. I'm the Vice President of Community Resilience and Sustainability, and I am in a lovely hotel in New York, so I'm out of my usual comfort zone altogether. My teams oversee a number of different responsibilities. So many of you are familiar with trust and safety. Trust and safety breaks down into basically three groups. Operations, who handle complaints about behavior, as well as some of the uglier stuff that we see on our sites, which I'm not going to name here, although I could. Trust and safety policy, whose job it is to try to help ensure that the policies we have are reasonable, equitable, and fair. And the disinformation team, who are working with a number of communities. They're our youngest team, to identify disinformation campaigns and to help come up with approaches to them. I also oversee human rights operations, which I'm calling it operations to distinguish it from some of the advocacy work we do. I do not oversee the advocacy teams, but I oversee the team whose job it is to help people who are in immediate peril as a result of their activities as Wikimedians. And I oversee our community development team, who help work with training, leadership development, and evolution. And I oversee the movement strategy and governance group, who are working to help shepherd the movement strategy from the plan stage to the reality stage, in supporting a number of work streams there, as well as being heavily involved in facilitating conversations for communities around the world and working on other governance issues like elections. I'm sorry if I forgot anybody. It's not that I don't care. Over to you, Vivian.
Well, thanks so much, Maggie. That's really, really helpful. And now we move on to the first question. So we have a question about support to underrepresented communities. So the question says, is there a plan to increase translation support for the next fiscal year so that community resilience and sustainability can support and reach out to underrepresented communities with a large number of non-English speaking users?
Okay. This has been a big subject of conversation in the last couple of weeks as the foundation is in its annual planning season. And in fact, one of the reasons I'm in New York is that we are convening here to start working on some of our annual planning ideas. And there is a stream of conversation that begins Monday, which is dedicated to translation support and services. So my guarded answer is, I really hope so. I'm really proud of what we've been able to achieve in the last couple of years in terms of increasing our outreach and being more inclusive. But we have way more languages that we are not yet engaging that we need to reach out to better.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. And now we're first diving into UCOC, as we saw that there is some pre-submitted questions regarding the Universal Code of Conduct as well. So as we receive a request asking Maggie to talk a little bit more about Universal Code of Conduct, and also considering that the voting of the enforcement guideline just closed last week, and we're still waiting for the voting results. So Maggie, I want to ask for this question, that would you share with us what will happen if it is a yes vote? And also what will happen if it's a no vote?
Okay, so well, first, I do have a member of the team here who's working on this, Patrick Early, but I'm going to try to address this, Patrick. I invite you to tell me if I get anything wrong. Y'all heard I have quite a lot of people under me, so I don't always know all the nitty gritty, but I'm pretty sure I've got the big picture. So right now what we are doing is we are assembling an idea of what the overall support is, and importantly, what the overall pain points are. If the vote doesn't clear its threshold, then we know there is simply not enough support to move into the board review phase. And we will be, my understanding is, asking either the same composition group or assembling a new one. I'm sorry, I'm not sure, Patrick would know, but moving back into drafting to make sure that we identify, having identified some of these pain points, we actually start to work on them. If the vote passes, then we will take the feedback, all of which will be published on Meta, summarized and published, and we will present it to the board, who will then be looking it over and also looking over the feedback to determine if they feel like it's reached a level where they can support. So there is a possibility that the UCOC enforcement would pass, but that the board would look at the feedback and decide that there is additional work that needs happening before they can ratify it. And in that case, we would again be assembling the group to work on it and continuing the conversations until it reaches a state where people feel like it's ready.
Thank you, Maggie. And we have a direct follow-up question from the chat, which asks, what would happen if it failed to pass twice?
My understanding, and also I'm going to bring in some of my personal beliefs here. So we need to figure out how to do enforcement, and we don't just go, well, we couldn't get it right the first time, so we stop. I think we just keep talking about it until we get something that is safe to try. I put those in scare quotes because it's kind of a buzz term, but is it good enough for us to go with it? Sort of the same way that we do policy evolution on the projects, or many of them. You put something together, you go with it, you see if it works, and then you change it. So if it doesn't pass, we keep working on it until it reaches an acceptable state.
Okay, and there's also a question relating to voting. So it's regarding that why in the phase 1, the UCOC text is not going through ratification.
Okay. So the first phase of UCOC was handled similarly to the way we have handled global policies in the past. So for example, with the terms of use, I was directly involved in facilitating the conversations around those. I think it was in 2011 or 2012. And those were several months of conversation with community, following which it was established as policy. That was the same thing that was done with the privacy policy. And the UCOC was approached in a very similar way. With the enforcement guidelines, I mean, this isn't part of the question, but the different approach makes a lot of sense to me, because we're asking people, I'm sorry, I have to cough, y'all. What an awkward moment. Okay, dry hotel air. So people asked for the opportunity to ratify, and it made a lot of sense to me, because we're asking the people who are going to be in charge of enforcing it on the ground, whether the practices and the approaches are working. And it's a very heavy process to get people into the boat, to ask them to, come forward, and then to maybe have to repeatedly do this until we get it right. But it's the only way to make sure that the people who are actually going to be enforcing it understand and agree with the approaches.
Okay. And moving on to the next question, which is regarding the enforcement guideline implementation itself. So the person who submitted this question explained that while people won't be opposing to zero tolerance for harassment, abuse, etc., and also believe that these are fundamental and obvious behavior norms that are widely accepted by the community, there are still concerns from the community regarding uncertainty of some certain aspects. And these aspects are A, regarding the affirmation of the UCOC through signed declaration or other format to adhere to the UCOC, and B, regarding the training. So Maggie, the question are, if there will be mandatory training sessions, who will be required to attend them? And how does this training work? And the other question linked to this is also, should somebody decline to actually sign this document or attend the training session, what would then be the consequences?
My answer is going to start with a very weird, I don't know. I know that the foundation is not going to be imposing training unilaterally. Any training we do will be co-created with community. I don't know who is supposed to take part in the training or what happens if they decline. I don't know if the enforcement guidelines even specify that. And one of the reasons that I don't know is because I see it as my job to be agnostic to the content of the enforcement guidelines. It's my job to support them, and I have not deeply ingested them. Patrick, is there anything in the guidelines about that?
Yeah, I think there's been some concern. I think there's the phrase in the guidelines that these trainings and an affirmation of whether you support the UCOC is mandatory. And I think I appreciate some worries with folks when they see that word mandatory. What does it mean? It does sort of imply some consequences. And so we have to have some deep conversations with community about what that means. And I do want to say, from my conversations with Maggie and team leadership, there's no desire whatsoever to start taking tools away from people until we've had, well, no, I shouldn't say until. There's no desire to start taking tools away from people. But we do have to have a conversation about how we get folks to recognize it. So I'll give the terms of use as an example again. Like, we have a technical way for people to affirm the terms of use every time they save and edit. I'm not saying that's how it should be for the UCOC, but I think we do have to find a solution that works for folks. And yeah, I mean, I think our concerns within the trust and safety team are probably the opposite, that there's communities that are suffering from not enough admins. There's communities who don't have a lot of a great number of folks applying to be new admins. And I think those are greater concerns to us than any sort of idea that we would be reducing the admin core as a result of the enforcement guidelines. So short answer, we need to have some discussions about what that affirmation actually means. And I do appreciate folks who are a bit worried about the vagueness of it, but I again, it is something that needs more conversation.
Thanks, Patrick. And there's a more also detailed sort of follow-up question relating to affirmation. So the question asks, in the enforcement guidelines for the UCOC, it states that individual who want to use the Wikimedia trademark in an event is required to affirm that they will acknowledge the UCOC. So in that case, would all the members of the community who are part of the activity will be required to sign the declaration, or will a representative of the community sign the declaration and that will suffice?
Well, let me ask, maybe somebody in this space knows. Currently, events where Wikimedia funding is provided must abide by the friendly space policy. How is that affirmed? Does anybody know?
Believe it is part of certain grant agreements, especially grants that involve events. Not a grant expert, but I believe that's part of the grant agreements that we currently have in place.
Okay, so those of you who've attended these events, have you been asked as individuals to sign some kind of pledge, or is it just related to the host? Because I know that many of the people in this space have been to meetings. Anne?
I can answer that question. I have attended many events where we have been informed that this will be in effect. When registering, we are normally told that it is in effect. So the act of registering confirms that you will abide by it. I think you might even have to put a check mark depending on the individual application forms or registration forms. So that's pretty straightforward.
Thanks. Owen, I see you also have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, similarly for the Querying Wikipedia working days that we ran sort of this time last year, it was mentioned in the registration details that we'd be requiring people to abide by the friendly space policy, which was very much tailored on the friendly space policy. And we reminded people at the start of sessions that that was the case, and that action up to and including excluding people from the sessions could be taken if there were problems. There was one very minor, arguably a breach, but not a breach in intention, that we had to deal with in the entire time, and it wasn't an issue at all. Nobody commented or objected to it.
Roy, you have something to share?
Yeah, I apologize for my video not being on. I keep turning it on and it keeps turning itself off, so I'm not sure what's happening there. But yeah, so I'm in New York. Welcome to New York, by the way. I've been to a few of the Wiki New York meetup things, and yeah, I don't remember whether I actually had to sign or checkbox or something, but it's certainly been widely publicized on the invites and announced in person, you know, at the beginning of the event that the friendly space policy applies and all of that kind of stuff. So I don't remember the details, but you know, everybody knows what's going on.
Now that you've all said things, I remember I went to the summit, oh gosh, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and the friendly space policy was posted on the door of each meeting room so that people were just reminded of it. So I would imagine it could be similar. I think I answered the question to the best of my ability. Did I miss anything, Vivian?
I think, oh, it's good. Thanks so much, Maggie. So maybe we move on to the next one. And of course, if there's still follow-up, we can come back to this later. So the next question is, the EN Wiki Arbitration Committee has had at least one case where the accused was not allowed to see some of the evidence against them, as it was thought it would put the editor providing the evidence at risk. How would the Universal Code of Conduct impact on this sort of case?
So this is getting into the content of the enforcement guidelines, which, as I said, as far as I'm concerned, it is my job to facilitate this process. Now, I do have strong opinions about how these things work. I'm an administrator in English Wikipedia. I'm an editor, even though, you know, I'm pretty dormant right now. I hope to get back to it when I retire. But as I understand it, the way the enforcement guidelines are written right now, there's a clause that calls for the accused to be heard where possible. Does that reflect the current writing, Patrick?
Yeah, I think the drafting committee talked about this in the context of balancing harm to the reporter. So, for instance, you know, if I was being harassed off Wiki, and I identified that to arbitration committee or to an administrator, if that information was then passed on to the person who's harassing me, it would probably make the situation much worse for myself. And so those sort of off-wiki situations, I think, do require some balance between, you know, the evidence that is available to the accused and the confidentiality of the reporter. I think for situations that are involving behavior on Wiki, especially behavior that's still visible to everyone, you know, that's not reb deleted or oversighted. It's a different situation, I think. In those cases, the evidence is publicly available. But I think that's what the drafting committee wants to strike a balance for is, again, the sort of needs and rights of reporters and the needs and rights of accused parties.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And we move on to the next questions. So if I understood this question correctly, this is also referring to the UCOC. The question asks, it is important to hear voices on this from communities outside the US too. Are there any ways to plan?
Are there any ways to what?
To plan, I guess that is there any plan going forward to engage with voices from communities outside of the US? I hope my interpretation of this question is correct. If it's not, please also add in the chat the person who had the question. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't quite understand. Also, y'all, I feel somewhat like you've come to see a performer and I'm like super low energy, and I'm sorry about that. I don't like travel. I didn't sleep well last night, so I'm like not very bubbly, but I'll try. We have the statistics on the engagement of the votes, even though we don't have the outcome of the votes. And I was pretty happy to see that we had engagement from some communities that we haven't usually heard from. This year, we focused in movement strategy and governance very strongly on drawing in people from around the world, but there are still communities that don't get involved at all. And that is really hard. So are there ways to plan for this? As I mentioned in the annual planning, we're talking about how to improve our translation support, which is one thing. The movement strategy team is going to be supporting the movement charter process, where we're going to decide what regional hubs look like. And regional hubs are hopefully going to go a long way towards really beginning to increase participation across the whole movement, because right now, sadly, we are still very English centric. And even me, right? I speak exactly one language fluently, and it's English. And that is a failure because there are so many people who would like to be here who can't, because I can't accommodate them. So there's a lot we need to do to get better at this. And we are planning, but it's probably going to be years before we really get there. The movement charter, I'm understanding they've asked until December 2023. I almost said 2013. Good heavens, how old am I? To finish it. And if the regional hubs are defined in the movement charter, then it's going to take a while to get those things up and active and to get them actually functional on the grounds.
Thanks so much, Maggie. So now we move back a little bit on UCOC. We have another question from the chat. So from the opposite perspective, if there are users with community respect, admins, functionaries, opcoms, who refuses to affirm or engage with training, and where user has a complaint about the respected user relating to the UCOC, presumably trust and safety will shepherd some form of process to address that. And not everyone shares the same faith in our wiki process that UCOC enforcement relies on, after all.
I'm a little confused by the question. Can somebody help me figure out the question is, it had to do with somebody not wanting to be trained, but also somebody being respected being a problem.
And sorry,
asking, go ahead.
This one was me trying to be sheepish in chat. Which probably helps you guess the context a little as well. But effectively, at the moment, all of our processes rely on wiki processes that not everyone has the same level of faith in all of the time. You spoke well and assuaged concerns about people who are reluctant to be required to do stuff, which I can understand. But presumably the flip side of that is, if there's a problem, if say I had a problem with an ARBCOM member who was reluctant to engage with UCOC, then presumably we'd be able to have some kind of process that your team would be able to shepherd through to resolve that?
So I hope the answer would be not my team. I hope the answer would be a global body. So when I first started talking about UCOC enforcement, I remember an early conversation I had with the English Wikipedia ARBCOM. And one of the things that I said to them at the time is, we need to build systems that are not built on trusting individual people. So, we've seen in the movement over the last couple of years, we've seen a couple of takeovers of communities, and we should not assume that any community is immune to that. We shouldn't assume English Wikipedia could never happen. We need to build systems where we can trust that the system itself reduces the risk of abuse. So I believe that everybody in this movement needs to have accountability to somebody and oversight to somebody, and that includes the arbitration committee, that includes trust and safety, that includes the board. I think we all need to be part of a system wherein there is somebody who is making sure that things are functioning correctly. So if any arbitration committee were not to be taking seriously the need to make sure that this is a safe environment to work, I think we need a global body that is responsible for looking at that neutrally and deciding if that is really an issue and how to fix it. I also think one of the problems we have in our movement, by the way, is that we tend to have an all or nothing assumption about people and behaviors, about whether or not people are already doing proper processes. And we don't really stop and think that sometimes situations can be improved. So I'm a manager in a US company that is based in California. I get trained how not to harass people regularly. And I will admit that every time I sit down to that training, I giggle, because as far as I know, I don't harass people. But every other time I take it, maybe I learn something new. I actually do learn. So training is not an insult. It's not a bad thing. It just keeps us aware and helps make sure that we're showing up in the way we should.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maggie. So maybe that since we don't have more questions on UCOC at the moment, we're moving on to human rights for now. So the first question is, what has the foundation been doing to support Ukraine?
So this is where, yeah, Cameron, I'm glad you're here. I always struggle, y'all, in wanting to be transparent and honest and truthful, and yet needing to make sure that I am keeping in mind how to protect people and keep them safe, which is one of the reasons why one of the rules that I have for these meetings that I won't talk about individual cases, because if I say the wrong thing, people can get hurt. So Cameron, do you want to speak to what we're doing? And let me introduce you all to Cameron, by the way. Some of you have met him because he's visited previous office hours. He is the lead of our human rights team. It is, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in charge of operations, not the policy. So his job is to go out when people are in danger, to build systems to help keep them safe. He's done a lot of work to protect journalists in the past. He's got a lot of contacts and information on this, and I think he's really well positioned to help us through this and similar situations that we've seen before. So Cameron, with that, build up, good luck.
Thanks, Maggie. Nice to see everybody. So in terms of, and I totally echo what Maggie is saying, it's important for us to, be mindful of what we're speaking about and how we talk about things in public settings, because it can actually put people in danger. Wikipedians, have been targeted throughout Wikipedia's history because of their participation in sharing knowledge, which, as many of you know, sharing knowledge is itself a very political act. But more to Ukraine. The human rights team has a couple of key pillars that we work on. The first is building out international partnerships to ensure that we have local and regional resources to be able to support our communities. And that is something that we have been actively engaging with. We have been able to point volunteers towards digital security agencies organizations who can actually help provide them with guidance and support on how they can do their work securely and safely. We provide, in addition, we also have developed some of our own guides that we provide to the various Wikimedia chapters that are affected by the conflict, Wikimedia Russia, Wikimedia Ukraine, if they have questions about these things. We also have a human rights interest group where we talk with members of the community to get a sense for how their human rights situation is in their jurisdiction and how they're feeling about everything. And we've been actively engaged with members of the community with the affected countries to actually be sure of how they're doing, and if they have any questions, that they can always reach out to us. So those are without going into too many details, those are the areas we've been supporting the community. And we have a dedicated human rights fellow who focuses on Eastern Europe or the former Soviet Union, who speaks Russian, who's there, as well as myself and the rest of the team, to support at all hours. So I hope that answers the question without going into too many details, so that you can also feel confident that there are people here who are actively monitoring the situation, literally at all hours of the day. And just as on a personal note, it is really heartbreaking to see what has been happening over there to so many innocent people. I have many friends in Ukraine. I've been there many times. I lived in Eastern Europe for many years, and it's also very personal for us. And so we are very committed to being there and also staying aware and understanding the cultural and regional dynamics that occur in these kind of conflicts. So anyway, I hope that answers the question.
I want to add just a tiny bit. We are a nonprofit. Big surprise, y'all know that. We receive money for a certain purpose from our donors, and we are limited in what we can do with our funds because we have a responsibility to those people who gave us their money to use it in the ways that they expect it to be used. So we are not a human rights intervention organization. We can't be, but we do work to provide immediate connections to people who are put in danger because of their good faith activities on Wikimedia's platforms. And even people who aren't necessarily Wikimedians, we can try to tell them about people, but we are not on the ground. We can't go extract people. We just try to make the connections where we can so that people stay safe.
Thanks, Maggie. And we have a follow-up question on that. Like, how can volunteers become more involved or help our community regarding in the areas on human rights?
Oh, so many ways. And I see, Anne, your hand's up, so we'll fit you in right after this. But one of the things that I have long struggled with as staff, I think about the Wikipedia, I guess it's an essay called Beans. I think about that a lot. So it's very important to me that I don't teach people how to abuse our community members. So I try to be really careful what I say in case it gives somebody ideas. But I think it's important to be aware that for some people, sharing knowledge is a radical and dangerous act. And that's probably true for more people than especially those of us for whom it's not maybe so personally dangerous. Realize that that even the act of sharing information is brave in some areas and on some topics. And that, frankly, that is true even in Western areas where we might have a sense of ourselves as being immune, but we have hate crimes. We have people who are doxxed and attacked because of their political beliefs or their personal life choices or even their personal identities. It happens here too. So I encourage people to be careful with their digital identities because it's not that hard for people to figure out who you are. We have a tension between whether we should all be open and honest about who we are and whether we should be anonymous, privacy versus transparency. Always in tension, but try to be compassionate and understanding that people may be facing different risks and dangers than you do, and be supportive of them in remaining safe. Encourage them to develop safe habits. Sometimes when I look at what my son's friends did when he was a teenager, it just gave me nightmares. These kids doing such unsafe things online and not understanding what the consequences could be. Cameron, I saw you raised your hand. Do you have a direct input on this before we turn it over to Anne?
Just wanted to echo what Maggie's saying, and to understand, that there are many people around in the movement live in very different jurisdictions and have very different cultural situations, which can really impact what they can or cannot say online, whether they legally can or socially can, and just to be mindful of that. And I think whenever there's doubt, it's really wise to ask, like, is this okay to talk about? Is this going to be, are you comfortable with this? And so on. And that's a really ground level way to really support individuals with their realities. Living overseas really taught me that. It was like, wow, there are really different realities outside of America, very deeply, that are quite different. And it's important, I think, for us to really acknowledge that.
Yeah, one more thing I want to add. I guess it's about a year ago, I lose track of time easily. We updated our non-disclosure agreement policy because we became aware of some concerns of pressure and extortion that could be applied to people in certain jurisdictions to provide information about other Wikimedians. And that was when it really came home to me that even the chat channels that I rely on to talk to people may not be safe for people in some parts of the world. So especially if you're dealing with people in embattled areas, be careful how you open your conversations. Make sure that they actually are feeling safe and comfortable because they may be monitored. With that said, Anne, thank you for your patience, please.
No worries. I wanted to add some things to the comments about what community members can do. One of the things that community members can work on is helping those who wish to use it to get IP block exemptions so that they can use VPNs, which can, in some cases, make things a little safer for them to edit. On English Wikipedia, most of that is done by Czech users. We hand it out like candy, I have to be honest. Because we're all familiar with the embattled areas, and as you call it, and they're not necessarily the ones that are obvious. I mean, Iran and stuff like that. Mainland China, which simply, the people can't do anything without IPBE, things like that. So I won't say that, I will correct myself and say we don't hand it out like candy. We do look at every case, but it's something that is commonplace, comparatively speaking, on English Wikipedia. Stewards do it for the global level. There are several other projects where you have to go directly to the Czech users or the administrators on those projects. We should probably have a list someplace about that, who to ask, depending on what project you want to look at. So that's a very big thing. But I think another one that we should really think about is that Wikipedians especially should stop being so focused on Wikipedia because, we're all familiar, I think, with the situation of, some Wikipedians who are in embattled areas who've wound up with articles written about themselves. And that is not helping them be safe. That is actually putting them at risk. And we really need to think about this because, quite honestly, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of equally as important people who are in custody in various places for doing something that the government didn't like. Our Wikipedians are not special when it comes to that. And the only reason that they're getting an article is because we know who they are. So we should really, really think about whether or not we should be having those articles because we're actually putting our own members at risk.
Thank you.
And I can't really do much as an individual about those sorts of things, but being a Wikipedian is not a reason for notability.
Thank you, Anne. That was really important to remind people.
Thanks very much, Anne, and also Maggie for the response. So maybe on this note, we move a little bit back as there's still a question on UCOC coming in. So there's a person that's interested to know that to do the training, would there be certain kind of remuneration, for example, covering food and so on? Is this something that the foundation is willing to do?
Well, I would guess it would depend on what the training looks like. Like the training I do for harassment takes me 45 minutes, I think. So probably not if that's what it winds up being. But if it's like a 3-day retreat, which seems like pretty awful, I wouldn't want to do that if my work required me to, then something would need to happen. So, so much is yet to be determined. Yeah, and Owen, did you want to say that out loud, or do you mind if I just share?
I just said that sounds like a rapid grant request to me.
The pizza grant. Yeah, I do want to point out that, this is a recommendation that our drafting committee has put forward, and we here at the foundation, we're not running out the gate trying to plan exactly how this training works until we have some community approval and community affirmation that this is the direction we want to go in. But when we, if we get to the situation where training is now something we're moving forward with, we have to have long conversations about what it looks like, how it's designed, what's in it, and those need to be transparent conversations with the community. And so, all I can say is that I promise we won't unveil some training package that no one's seen before and say, hey, everyone, training time. No, that won't be the process.
Okay, and there's a follow-up question also on training. Do affiliates have to organize and be involved in the training process for their community? My understanding is that, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are unclear yet, but Maggie, would you like to answer this one?
Well, I would take the word have to and say, I imagine they might want to. What kind of partnership that turns out to be remains to be seen, but have to, probably not. One of the things that I'm conscious of when I think about affiliates and our affiliate ecosystem, and some of you know this personally, I know, who are in this space, some affiliates are big and well organized and wealthy, and some affiliates are small and just a couple of people sitting somewhere trying to get started on the ground. They need different kinds of support. So I would say that there should be space for affiliates to be involved at every level that makes sense to them, and that we should be providing support to the affiliates according to their needs.
Thank you, Maggie. And perhaps then now we move on to a question relating to movement strategy, as also Owen mentioned about grants. So I see there's a question relating to that. The question says, I'm interested in a specific area of movement strategy, for example, a recommendation, a cluster, an initiative, but so far it hasn't been prioritized. What can I do it to make it a priority?
So I'm going to ask Kim to speak to that. Kim is the Director of Movement Strategy and Governance, and he's in the space. Kim?
Can I ask can you repeat the question, please? Someone was pinging me right now.
Yes,
we all multitask all the time.
Okay, so the question is, if I'm interested in a specific area of movement strategy, for example, a recommendation, a cluster, an initiative, but so far it hasn't been prioritized, what can I do to make it a priority?
Yes, very good. Everybody wants me now. Well, yes. So basically, first of all, I want to explain why this prioritization exists in the first place. There's 40-something initiatives, and everybody agrees that it doesn't make sense to try to just go ahead with all of them at the same time. Each initiative is a lot of work. Just MCDC is one initiative. Hubs, regional mathematics is one initiative. So there's this. People also understand that it wouldn't make any sense that we just work on one and then when we finish do the second one and so forth. So we need to find a balance in between, and this is why some initiatives are called prioritized, whereas others are waiting. Now someone is knocking at the door. Nothing happened in this room in the entire day until now.
And why don't you go take the door knock? It's probably one of your kids, and we'll come back to you. Okay. So Vivian, can you ask me something else until Kim returns?
Yes. Okay, maybe then there's question relating to community development, but also touch on movement strategy. So this question says, how is the foundation supporting movement strategy recommendation on invest in skills and leadership development?
Ooh, okay. Simona is in the room. She is our Senior Manager of Community Development. Do you want to speak about this?
Sure. So our team, the community development team, really looks at how do we support the movement from country to country, region to region, language to language, to develop the capacities to not only kind of contribute or contribute to projects, but to also kind of grow communities, welcome newcomers, and be effective in critical governance and leadership roles. With the skill and the invest in skill and leadership recommendation, one of the biggest tensions that we recognize is not everyone shares the same definition of leader. The name can be different from, they could either be an organizer can be a leader, a trainer can be a leader, an ED of an affiliate is a leader. And so one of the first things our team is kind of focusing on is how do we actually bring some consensus or a shared idea of the definition of leader and leadership development. There has been a number of different research projects, community consultations on leadership and leadership development, but there hasn't really been a consensus on definition. So we are working to convene a working group of volunteers who will kind of help steward that definition building for the movement. How that is going to be structured is there is an open application out right now. You can find it on our community development meta page, and anybody is welcome to join. This group will meet weekly for a specific period of time to kind of think through the definition and then kind of craft it together and pose it out to the movement for feedback and iteration. Once we have that kind of shared definition, it will kind of highlight how we then move forward with the implementation piece, such as the movement leadership development plan, and also help us focus on what kind of infrastructure is needed to kind of help communities or movements or individuals kind of grow this skill set or kind of bring this to their communities. Thank you, Cornelius.
Great, thank you. So there's also still another question on community development. It's regarding how is the foundation supporting capacity building and skill development as we enter year 2 of the pandemic?
So regions, there is no one shared approach to how communities are coming back together to kind of learn together. And so one of the things that we recognized was that we haven't done a consistent job of ensuring that training has been accessible year round. And so our team has really been piloting the idea of online learning. The community programs team in product, they were kind of they kind of helped develop the roadmap to online learning with their greenhouse train the trainer program. So we're kind of leveling up on that. What that means is that we're looking to actually support the development of a learning management system, an online platform that would allow us both the foundation and develop pathways for communities to kind of engage with this platform. To host curriculums, develop their own modules for different elements of capacity building. And so in 2021, our team piloted 2 online courses on Moodle, which was building partnerships and identifying and addressing harassment online. And so we are currently working to actually now build these into self-guided curriculums that we will then host on the online learning platform. So you can check out our page on our meta page again to learn more about that. Everything that we do, all of our programs on how we can support individuals and groups and affiliates and other user groups and movement groups is on that page as well. An announcement will be coming out around April that will kind of indicate when these courses are online and ready to go and for anybody to kind of start kind of engaging with the curriculums. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Simona. And so maybe we move back to movement strategy in general as well. So there is a question, since Kim also mentioned about movement charter drafting committee. There's a question that says, it has been almost 5 months since the movement charter drafting committee was formed. What is happening there?
Let's see what happens now. Okay, I can answer this question. I can also address, I was just giving the context for the previous question. I didn't answer it, so I'm happy to address it as well. Well, so the movement charter drafting committee was formally constituted on November 1st. And actually, there's at least one member in this call, so please feel free to add. I'll start with my interpretation because we are supporting that committee. And well, you know, the fact that what these 15 people had in common is that they had been voted and selected and elected through different channels, and now they are in a room, which is not even a room because you know, we are not traveling. And now they have to start doing something like, well, start drafting a movement charter, which is something that we haven't done. There's so many expectations. A team of 15 people has to also get organized. So yes, it's been 5 months, but it's been, time flies. And what the team has been doing, which also, by the way, comprises different time zones and even different languages, they have been discussing how to organize themselves, how to organize the work. They have been, for instance, meeting with board members to start also discussing how this relationship, how they can work together, and so forth. And also with my own team, you know, how can we support them with communications and community engagement? So there's been a lot of work that actually you need to start doing before you can embark with the first line of a draft. And this is what has been happening, what I can recollect now. I don't know if anyone in the room wants to complement with more information. No, not throwing anyone.
If I may invite, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least he's not naming the person he's throwing, but you don't have to say anything. I won't name you either. But if you do have something to add, you're welcome.
In the meantime, I can answer just briefly the previous question, which was about if I'm interested in an initiative that is not prioritized right now. Well, then if you're interested, first step is let us know. We have an email address where you can reach out to the movement strategy team. There is this movement strategy Telegram group. There's the movement strategy talk page. There's no lack of channels really to let us know. But letting us know, hey, I'm interested, and this is what I have in mind. It's the first step. We also have movement strategy grants. So if what you have in mind would come together with a request for funding, that also is another venue that you can use. So that's really the first step. And we are actually, the fact that some initiatives are prioritized and some others are not is because in some cases, clearly there was a push and an interest, whereas in others, it wasn't less clear. So if you can now turn an area of movement strategy from we don't know or not much movement into I'm really interested and there's a bunch of people also willing to work with us, then yeah, let's talk. Maybe we now can activate another initiative.
Thanks so much, Kim. And I would like to invite Anne to share a little bit more regarding MCDC.
Hi, everybody. I am actually a member of the MCDC, the Movement Charter Drafting Committee. Wasn't expecting to talk about this today, but I will.
Sorry, Anne. Sorry to interrupt, but I think you've moved your mic up. Sorry to interrupt.
Not a problem. Thank you. I think, yeah, I was eating lunch. I wasn't expecting to talk about this today, but I will, because I think there are some useful pieces of information for everybody. We are starting to be doing our outlines for what we expect we will be putting into the charter. We communicate pretty regularly with the community to keep information going. We have at least a monthly summary of what we're doing. We're looking at how we want to structure the charter a little bit. We've agreed that we probably want to start off with a preamble that includes the values and so on, and probably move that along first before we do an awful lot of the other structure. We've developed a bunch of subcommittees that handle things. We've got a communications plan that's available for everybody, what you're going to hear about when. We've got our timelines going. And so a lot of this was background structure, but now we're starting to get into some of the meat and potatoes. And now we're starting, we are planning on doing an in-person meeting in June, because there are just some things that work better in person. You know, when you're trying to hammer out some of the content of a very major document, you want to do that in person because you want to be able to respond immediately without having to worry about this. As Kim points out, we're across time zones. I think we have an 18-hour variation in our group, and that's a lot of time. So it makes it very hard even for us to all get together in a meeting. So we're working on all of that stuff, and I'm hoping that you know, your feedback will continue to come in. We've got a communication channel now open for the community that comes directly to the committee, and we also, obviously, all of us have watch listed pages on Meta for anything that comes there. I hope that's helpful for you all.
Thanks so much, and for the extra info on MCDC. So now we have another questions backed on the safety aspect. So Maggie, regarding safety of users, with my community, they are people creating anonymous bulletin boards online dedicated in criticizing, marginalizing, ridiculing users, especially admins, because we don't get new people who want to be admins. Are there any help we can ask to the foundation?
So I saw this question and I really wanted to answer it. So I'm glad we had time. I mean, not that makes it sound like I have a perfect answer and I don't. So the first thing I want to say is I feel like 90% of what trust and safety operations does is handle weird stuff that nobody ever prepared for. So a lot of the time we get stuff in and the first thing we have to do is figure out what is this? And when I say we, I really mean them because they don't share it with me until it reaches the end. What is this and what can we do about it? And sometimes the answer is there are things we can do directly. Sometimes the answer is there are ways we can advise people. And sometimes, well, I wish it weren't true, there isn't much we can do. When editors or contributors are involved in these kinds of activities outside of Wikimedia platforms, and they are harassing or bullying community members, then I think that is something where trust and safety sometimes can help. And I say sometimes because, of course, we also have the local first principle where we try to allow local communities to handle things where they can. We are often involved in cases where local functionaries ask us to help out when they feel like something is too hard for them, too much for them, too dangerous for them, when they risk retaliation themselves or otherwise feel ill-equipped. But sometimes we can reach out to the individuals who are involved. We can encourage them to change their behavior. Sometimes that actually works. Sometimes it doesn't. I mean, many of you who are administrators yourselves or who work in these areas know that sometimes when you ask somebody to behave differently, they do exactly the opposite. Sometimes we can reach out to web hosts depending on how serious the issue is, although the foundation doesn't have legal standing in some of these cases. And sometimes what we need to do is help the people themselves reach out to these platforms. The main thing I want to say, though, is if there are no local processes, or if you just don't even know what to do, and we have a smallish team and a lot comes through the doors, you can reach out to ca@wikimedia.org, which is the trust and safety team, and they will look at it and they will determine if it's something that they can help. I know we're short on time, so I could keep talking about this forever. I'm really sorry about that. I don't think anybody should have to face personal attack for volunteering to help spread free knowledge. I mean, none of us are perfect. All of us make mistakes. I make mistakes sometimes. There are ways that we can talk about these mistakes and get better without making people feel attacked, harassed, belittled, without harming their online reputation or their relationships with each other and their friends. It should not be a place where people come and they feel vulnerable to attack for doing good faith work. And most people are here to do good faith work.
Thank you very much, Maggie. I see that we're at time. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here today, for your questions, for your interest, and for your patience. And also, of course, a very big thanks to Maggie for the wonderful conversation as well. So here I want to wish everyone a very good day. Take care, and we see each other soon.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Emerald, I think you can finish the live stream.
Okay, so the live stream is done.